allow for growth to happen. There are CIL, cash in lieu of parkland policies, as well as parkland dedication policies. There are development charges. There are community benefits charges. Those are sort of the big pots that the province has said, these are the funds that when development occurs are going to go into building the infrastructure that is needed in order to sustain the growth. And the growth is having impacts in our communities. For those of us who are maybe a little more central, we're seeing the cheek by jowl nature of a 26-story tower that goes in at the end of the street. Certainly in Kitchissippi, we've been feeling the effects for quite some time. It has traffic impacts. It has impacts with respect to tree loss. It has impacts with respect to loss of green space. There's a lot of impacts that intensification is having. And this council, to its credit, has determined that it's going to proceed with intensification despite some of those challenges. But they are there. And certainly one of the big challenges that we are facing, particularly again in the downtown neighborhoods, is the gentrification effects of intensification. So when, even a 3-story multi-residential unit goes in on what was maybe formerly a rooming house, that's the loss of affordable housing units. And we as a council don't have a lot of tools from the province in order to be able to deal with that. We have those 3 big pots of money. We know that every time we come up with a development charge regime, that is probably going to go to the OLT as developers try to bring those development charges down. Right? They don't want to pay what we consider is necessary in order to support the growth that we see. Our parkland dedication, if I understand properly, is currently in appeal. Right? We tried to get a better deal for residents, and unfortunately, we are not the ones who control that. That is before the Ontario Land Tribunal. We know that the province does not want those additional funds to be a hurdle to development approval. They've been very clear with that, right? We can't use the development review process to try to leverage anything outside of those big pots in order to get the funding that we need in order to achieve a better public realm, in order to offset the loss of affordable housing, in order to get traffic calming and more livable streets. Some developers, and we know that some lawyers and some consultants are telling their clients, don't give a nickel. This is what you owe the city. Do not provide anything over and above. But developers are also meeting with the community through the course of those consultations. They're hearing directly from residents about the impacts that residents are concerned those developments are going to have. And they're talking with councillors about what the impacts are that those developments are going to have. And some of them, to their credit, are saying, you know what? The residents who are going to live in this neighborhood deserve to live in a great neighborhood. The residents who already live in the neighborhood don't deserve to be unduly impacted by the development that we are proposing. Here is some small contribution that we are willing to make over and above what is strictly required by the law. And when those developers are acting in that good faith, maybe it's a piece of public realm that the city's not going to build. There's no funding available to make it kick-ass, but a little bit additional contribution from a developer can make sure that it is a great piece of public realm. There are times when developers are willing to invest in making our communities better, and when they do, we should be grateful for that because we don't have the leverage to force it. I'm not suggesting that we should be approving MOUs that are not voluntary on the part of developers. But when it is voluntary, let's not throw those wrenches in the works. I am more than happy to support this MOU, which is hopefully going to offset the gentrification effects of this building going in and the increased traffic that's going to go in that neighborhood. I am also extremely keen that the control of how voluntary agreements are negotiated continues to remain the beneficiaries determined in consultation with the councillors. Right? We're not talking about offsetting the traffic impact of this Catassa development in Canada, right? There's a very immediate local impact that needs to be done, and it is the local councillor who is working with the local community who understand what those local impacts are going to be. We don't need to say, okay, GM, here's a pot of money that's available for you to do traffic calming at some other place in the community.
That's time, Councillor.
Recognize the experience of the local councillor. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Dudas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is such a difficult conversation, and it's uncomfortable. And I think our residents need to know that when we're approving or rejecting a development application, it's solely based on the merits of that application. And any exchange, big or small, of money muddies those waters. We don't have a policy on this. We've kind of been flying by the seat of our pants. And yes, MOUs have been signed in the past. But when I think of the development process and when staff are starting an application with a prospective developer, they're talking about what that development needs to fit into that community. Now, I would argue sometimes I don't agree with staff. I don't feel that it suits the infill requirements of that community. I have my own developments of that. But I've been told in my own right, as I've heard from other of my colleagues, that for me to ask for a sidewalk to be added to Navan Road because there's thousands of houses being built by a particular development is inappropriate for me to do so. So I beg and I plead for a little extra asphalt just to put in some area so somebody could walk and not get struck by a car. And I'm not even allowed to ask for that, but maybe or maybe not, they might do it. It is not being fairly applied. Now, I would say, and I'm going to say it again, I think that this MOU was done in good faith. I don't think there was anything nefarious about it, but it wasn't done publicly. There was no Engage Ottawa page that was put up that said, public, what would you like to see out of this? And I don't believe that when we walk into a room as a councillor, that doesn't come with some level of authority, that doesn't influence a discussion. So when we walk into a room and we sit down across from a developer, if we say we would like to see this and they say yes, how does that not influence the process? We don't know if it did or not. We need to extricate ourselves from this. That's why I'm very, very comfortable with Councillor Curry's motion about making it citywide. I'm comfortable with letting staff do the job they're supposed to do, which is have delegated authority and say, listen, we need a front-ending agreement to put a traffic signal in at La Marche, because we need to get this done to get so staff are doing that work to try to mitigate infill. It might not be exactly what we want. It might not be the pickleball court next door. It might not be the traffic speed camera thing that we want everything. And don't get me wrong, I would love to accept all sorts of money to improve the situation in my community. But I can't walk away from that and say that didn't influence my decision on a development application. I know deep down it doesn't, but how do you prove that to your community? And I'm saying this, that in the absence of a policy, I cannot support this MOU today. And I want to, and I deeply believe that it was done with all good intents. But I do not want in a couple weeks from now or a year from now or anything to be those conversations about being in the developer's pocket or we're influenced by developers. We're not. We're supposed to be looking at the values and the merits of an application based on that and that alone. And we're supposed to trust our staff to do their job based on the legislative legal requirements that the province determines that we have to follow. So that being said, I think that for me, it's almost straightforward. As much as I would love to believe that it was convoluted, I cannot support this MOU. I will be supporting the Carr motion, the Curry motion, and I desperately need us to have a policy in place so we don't go through this again.
Thank you, Councillor Dudas. Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Mayor. I'll just say I'm going to support the Carr Kits motion. I appreciate that there needs to be a policy discussion on this, and certainly want to support that motion. In terms of MOUs that have been supported by this council unanimously, we've had MOUs in 2022, in 2021, in 2020, supported unanimously by this council, repeatedly. For Haringate, for Bank and Riverside, and for other developments. We also have regular negotiations that have gone on prior to Bill 23 through site plan. That means there might be more trees added. There might be a wider sidewalk. It might be a bike lane that gets added there. There might be more green space. See, cash in lieu is part of that. But through site plan, those discussions happen regularly between councillors. Now that's happening regularly with staff. I think it just goes to show you that we all have a job to do, and our job is to work for our communities in their best interests with integrity. And that's what's happened in this case. With regard to the Curry motion, I think we need to split it in two, Mayor. There's two parts of that. There's the first be it resolved, which is directly related to the discussions and negotiations in good faith within my community prior to any policy being in place, prior to having this direction in the second part of the motion. So their understanding is, hey, here's the draft MOU. We're agreeing to make a voluntary contribution around traffic calming and affordable housing because the communities asked for those things. And there was an Engage Ottawa with DevApps, but lots of comments came in there for these several developments. It's not just this one development. There's others in Glebe Annex and other land here with this developer, which is why they're listening to community in this way. And so I think if you want to have a policy debate about the second portion of the Curry motion, fair enough. But when this was discussed and voluntary contributions were agreed to, that was before any of that direction was there. If it was in place then we would have made that very clear, but it wasn't. And so how can you go back now and say, okay, well, we're going to put this in a different light, and maybe they pull the funding as a result? I mean, I might, if you're that developer, because it's not going to the contribution of the ward where they said they would want it to go, right? So it makes sense to split these up. The first be it resolved and the second be it resolved. I have no problem supporting the second one, so that at least we have some parameters moving forward to midterm governance. But to cast aspersions on the good work that's been done thus far, the negotiations and discussions that have happened with community, which has been happening regularly, repeatedly. I don't know if everyone has been doing it here, but certainly our office has, many other offices, Jean Cloutier previously. There's been offices that have done this regularly because you know what your community needs. That's all that we were putting forward at that time. So, and in the future, I'm open to like a CIL type policy. I know it's 60-40, there's 50-50, but that's a policy discussion. We have that debate at policy discussion. And I'll just say, there's a site right now at Bank and Chamberlain, badly needed affordable housing in that area, right close to Centertown, where there's not a lot of affordable housing. It's sitting there, it's a parking lot. And through the Bank Street Height and Character Study, that has been identified by city staff as needed affordable housing. That's been discussed through that process as well. Same with that traffic coming. You all know Bronson and Carlin. You've all been through there. It's not the best place to drive, walk, bike. It's not great. So there needs to be improvements eventually. There will be. And of course, through the Glebe Annex area in Dow's Lake, there's new development happening with the hospital and other areas. So look, I'll support the car kits motion. I'm going to support the second portion of Councillor Curry's motion because I think it makes sense. But in the negotiations that happen in good faith with integrity, that should pass here. And we should move on with the policy as we've done in 2022, 2021, 2020, and prior to this. So I'll leave it there, Mayor. Thanks. And just ask for those separation of those two clauses.
Thank you. Councillor Plante.
Oui, j'ai une question pour Maître Mark.
I have a question for Mark. Do you want me to ask the question in English?
I did not bring my headphones with me. I apologize.
Oh, it's okay. Don't worry. And I apologize. I'm just finding a bit of this discussion a little confusing and a bit over my head. But is there a way in which, and again, this may go back to what Councillor Minal was referring as a policy discussion, but is there a way in which we could have sort of the traffic calming aspect stay in his ward and then the affordable aspect percentage go citywide?
Mr. Mayor, this is a voluntary contribution. And so CATASA has a say. Could language be inserted that as part of council approval? Such is open to council, Mr. Mayor.
So would I have to do a friendly amendment? Is that, sorry, I just need a bit of direction here.
It is up, of course, to the mover and the seconder as to whether or not the amendment is friendly. As a technical matter, can recommendation one be directed to be ward specific, whereas recommendation 2 is citywide? As a technical matter, yes, it can. CATASA has a say as to whether or not that is acceptable.
Okay. Can I ask a question of the ward councillor? Councillor Minal, would you be amenable to that?
So my worry is that there's going to be no money left at the end of the day here because we're changing this on the fly and it's not what's been agreed to previously.
Okay.
And so that's my concern with this. I'm fully, as I say, to the second portion of the Curry motion, fully amenable to that. The first portion, though, before any direction or policy was in place with this, was negotiated in good faith, and that should remain there. So that's my direction, and happy to support the other portions here so that we can come together on this thing. We all want a good policy in place. And I'll also just say right now, Councillor, it is the discretion of the general manager. It's written in the MOU and in the original motion that the affordable housing is at the discretion of the general manager under our MOU in motion.
Okay.
That's already under their discretion. It's already their delegated authority.
Okay, sorry. And then I have one more question for Clara. So my understanding is for the affordable housing projects that we have in the city, there's sort of a list that we're going down the line to fund, right? And I know you're saying you have the parking lot that you really want to turn into affordable housing, and that's great. But the city does have a list of affordable housing projects that we have prioritized, correct?
That is correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Merci, Conseiller Plante. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to underscore my concerns from a broader perspective of what this specific decision could mean in terms of precedent within the city on development applications and with regard to our overall housing policies writ large. We have said since the get-go that we need to develop more housing, be it market rate, be it affordable. This process I cannot see go forward without adding a layer of process to every development that we have, potentially adding cost to it as well. And I'll just highlight in the letter that we received this morning from the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association, quote, while GOBA refrains from commenting on individual projects, the association is deeply troubled by the potential precedent that this may establish and its direct impact on the integrity of the development process. I think we should be concerned. We need to have a policy in place before we move forward with significant dollar value voluntary contributions. I think it's that straightforward, and for that reason, I will not be supporting the motion that came forward this morning, but I'll be supporting the two amendments.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Councillor Carr, is it your intention to wrap up? Is that what you're doing here?
Yes, if I could ask a point of clarification on Curry Plant motion beforehand. I could combine the two?
Yep. If that's the case.
Councillor Tierney has a hand up, so I'll go at the
end. I had a question as well, which I'll do before we go back to you, if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
Councillor Tierney?
Great. I also wrestle with this one because I don't like the idea of precedent setting, and even the mention of, well, maybe Takasa won't like this because it was originally structured for a certain area, they could pull out. That's concerning because that makes it specific and siloed and doesn't allow our professional staff to be able to invest that money for the best return on investment, housing, whatever the case may be. So for that reason, I won't support the original, but I certainly will be supporting Kathy on that. I find it concerning if we're splitting the vote based on where. That's of concern to me. I think we all have to collectively work together. We said at the beginning of the meeting. And the only way to make that happen is to support the motion in its entirety, both parts. We need to be able to get a policy in place. And I feel a little bad for Takasa. I think they may have, I've never dealt with them before. I think they may have painted themselves in the corner a little bit. I'm sure they've heard from many others in the industry. You mentioned GOBA. There's a grave concern. This will be precedent setting. I don't want people showing up, and I have the highest number of high-rise towers going in. I have a ton of applications, and I don't want people coming to me, well, look what happened here. That creates a divide where our focus should be on our housing emergency, not about how beautiful a sidewalk is. And those are all great to haves, but it's never, you have to determine, do we have a beautification emergency? Probably not. So I think we should focus on, if they want to make this voluntold contribution, that we have to make sure it's in a global pot at a minimum till we have some kind of policy put in place. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Bradley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to ask staff to comment on the precedent setting notion because I recall a number of years ago now that there was a development in Gloucester Southgate Ward where there was a phase one of a subdivision and a phase two. And we were looking to put, using CIL, a splash pad in a local park. And the councillor at the time negotiated with the developer to pay for the water hookup. They were under no obligation to do so, but saw benefit in investing in a community in which they were going to continue to develop, because having a splash pad in a local park obviously has high value for the residents and future residents who would move into their development. So if staff could comment on the precedent setting nature of this type of an agreement, whether it's in an MOU as we see it before us today or through a site plan commitment, I think that would be helpful because I don't actually think this is precedent setting. And so I think there's a bit of conflation going on here. So perhaps planning staff could weigh in on that piece.
Mr. Mayor, I am aware of such things having occurred in the past. I believe it would benefit, such a scenario moving forward would indeed benefit from what's being proposed in the motion being brought by Councillor Carr and Councillor Plant.
Thank you, Mr. Mark. And I agree that having some guidelines around this type of agreement is beneficial, but I guess I didn't really hear, you're aware of other agreements. Is this precedent setting? Is an agreement where a developer goes above and beyond what they're required to do under the legislation precedent setting?
Mr. Mayor, it's voluntary, and therefore, in my opinion, it is not precedent setting because any particular applicant in any particular case is free to say no.
Thank you, Mr. Mark. I think that's good clarity for us around the table. I don't think that this is a precedent-setting agreement. I think that it makes sense that a developer who's developing in an area wants to make sure that the community has the benefits that future residents would want to see when choosing where they might want to purchase or rent in housing. So I just don't think it's fair to characterize this as a precedent-setting agreement that we've never seen before, and that it's opening a door to, this is going to be every time an application comes forward, developers are going to be expected to provide a voluntary contribution. And I think it's also a good reminder to, in this case, this application is already approved. This was negotiated after the approval. So there was no pressure that perhaps this application wouldn't be approved if they didn't volunteer to make this type of contribution. So I think that's also a good reminder. So I don't think this is precedent setting. I think this is that Councilor Menard has done his job for his community, and he's represented his community well, and he was able to negotiate a deal. And I've also heard, if it's a swing set, it's fine, but if it's $300,000, it's not fine. So is it the principle that we're debating, or is it the amount? Like, I'm just really confused here. I think that separating the two articles in the motion is fine, but I think that Councilor Menard has done his job, and that the community is expecting these traffic improvements and affordable housing in the neighborhood is a good thing for all of us, and that we should approve the original MOU as it's presented before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Just before we go back to Councillor Carr, I had a couple of questions. So just to be clear, though, Mr. Mark, you're saying it's not precedent setting from the perspective of the city, but we can't know whether it's precedent setting in terms of the perception of developers. Is that fair to say? If developers feel that that there is an expectation on the part of the city, even if the wording is that it's voluntary, we can't know what their interpretation of this would be. Is that fair to say?
Mr. Mayor, in the staff involvement on this file, the message has, to my knowledge, been consistent that this is voluntary. And that certainly was communicated in the memo that was provided and was communicated in responses that were given at committee. So that word has been clearly used. If a developer has a different understanding after having heard that term used consistently, it is possible, Mr. Mayor, but the word voluntary has been used by staff consistently in addressing this matter.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just saying in terms of how it's perceived in the community, we can't control that. I just wanted to ask either the city manager or the interim Director of Planning, on if Councillor Curry's motion passes it in its entirety, I presume that the city would work with the donor, the contributor, to proceed with a contribution that would make sense for them and make sense for the city, which would include the possibility of it being what it was originally intended for. Is that fair to say? In other words, you're not just going to go back to the contributor and say, we've decided to use the money somewhere else and put at risk the contribution. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say, Mr. Mayor. They have the intention, where the money was to go and how it was to be spent. It's their gift.
So even if Councillor Curry's motion passes, you would work with the contributor to allocate the money in a way that they saw benefit as the voluntary contributor.
We would have that discussion.
Yeah.
And if there are other projects, I may bring it up. But it's their contribution, and we will work together with them.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just say, for my own part, I am concerned about the perceptions around this. I have no questions about about any specific agreement, but I don't like the optics that are created by these kinds of agreements. And so I think, and in the absence of any specific policy, I think the dynamics are such that when everything is done fairly and voluntarily, some people may perceive otherwise. I would underscore again that the Integrity Commissioner did not bless this particular agreement. The Integrity Commissioner said only that it was not her jurisdiction and that it was a matter of policy. So I think we need to be mindful of that. So I am very supportive of Councillor Carr's motion to develop a policy. And I think that will provide more clarity going forward for everyone and provide, frankly, protection for councillors from allegations that there is something unfair or involuntary about future contributions that are made. So I will be supporting Councillor Carr's motion. I will also be supporting Councillor Curry's motion. Councillor Carr, did you want to wrap up on your motion?
Yes. I think our discussion today illustrates the fact that we need to have a policy in place.
Okay, so there's been a request to vote separately on the two be it resolved items in the Curry motion. So we'll start by voting on the first half of the Curry motion, please.
Councillor Johnson?
Yes.
Councillor King?
Yes.
Councillor Tierney?
Yes.
Councillor Curry?
Yes.
Councillor Devine?
No.
Councillor Dudas?
Yes.
Councillor DeRuse?
Yes.
Councillor Kitts?
Yes.
Councillor Bradley?
No.
Councillor Brown?
Yes.
Councillor Troster?
No.
Councillor Brockington?
No.
Councillor Luloff?
Yep.
Councillor Kavanaugh?
No.
Councillor Kelly?
Yes.
Councillor Carr?
Yes.
Councillor Hubley?
Yes.
Councillor Plante?
No.
Councillor Menard?
No.
Councillor Leeper?
No.
Councillor Gower?
No.
Councillor Lowe?
No.
Councillor Hill?
No.
Councillor DeRoche?
Yes.
Mayor Sutcliffe?
Yes.
14 yeas, 11 nays.
Okay. On the second half of the Curry motion then, is that carried or does it?
I would like to dissent on that.
Okay. So recorded vote then?
Yeas and nays, please.
Yep. On the second half of the Curry motion, please.
Councillor Johnson?
realize now I didn't vote right on the first one, but I will vote no on the second one to make up for it.
All right, Councillor King,
Yes.
Councillor Tierney,
Yes.
Councillor Curry,
Yes.
Councillor Devine,
No.
Councillor Dudas,
Yes.
Councillor DeRuse,
Yes.
Councillor Kitts,
Yes.
Councillor Bradley,
No.
Councillor Brown,
Yes.
Councillor Troster,
No.
Councillor Brockington,
No.
Councillor Luloff,
Yes.
Councillor Kavanaugh,
No.
Councillor Kelly,
Yay.
Councillor Carr,
Yes.
Councillor Hubley, Councillor Plante,
Oui.
Councillor Menard,
Yes.
Councillor Leeper,
Yes.
Councillor Gower,
Yes.
Sir Lowe,
Yes.
Councillor Hill,
No.
Councillor DesRoches,
Yes.
Mayor Sutcliffe,
Yes.
18 yeas, 7 nays.
Okay, that's carried. And now on the car motion, please. Is that carried?
Carried.
Okay, that's carried. And then on, if we could do a recorded vote on the motion as amended, please.
Councillor Johnson,
Now we're voting on item 14.1 motion memorandum of understanding with Catassa Group as amended by the two motions that we just carried. The two motions that we just carried.
Yes.
Councillor King,
Yes.
Councillor Tierney,
No.
Councillor Curry,
No.
Councillor Devine,
Yes.
Councillor Dudas,
No.
Councillor DeRuse,
No.
Councillor Kitts,
Yes.
Councillor Bradley,
Yes.
Councillor Brown,
No.
Councillor Troster,
Yes.
Councillor Brockington, Councillor Luloff,
No.
Councillor Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Councillor Kelly,
Yes.
Councillor Carr,
Yes.
Councillor Hubley,
No.
Councillor Plante,
Oui.
Councillor Menard,
Yes.
Councillor Leeper,
We.
Councillor Gower,
Yes.
Councillor Lowe,
No.
sorry, Councillor Hill,
No.
Councillor DesRoches,
No.
Mayor Sutcliffe,
Yes.
15 yeas, 10 nays.
Okay, carried. Item 18, motions of which notice has already been given. We have the motion on the Ottawa International Airport Authority tree planting. Councillor Brockington, did you want to speak to that? Or we can just go right to other people?
No, I'll have an introduction. The main message in the book, 3 Cups of Tea, is that by sitting down together over a cup of tea, we can tackle any obstacle, any challenges we have over tea, developed a personal bond that allows us to tackle even the most challenging of subjects. The motion before us today is a simple request. Given the recent clear cutting of a pine plantation on Hunt Club Road, under the authority of the airport, the focus of 2 years of acrimony and distress in the community, council is being asked to endorse a request to replace those trees by planting others. The motion does not prescribe how or where or what species, simply to plant more trees. Council placed a high standard on the Ottawa Hospital when it went through multiple site plan rounds, including for the parking garage currently under construction. For trees being removed at this location, they agreed to replace them on a 5-to-1 ratio. When the Taggart Algonquin Consortium removed a forested area on their lands with no heads up to the local councillor or community, people were justifiably angry and called into question the permissions that were granted after the fact, no less. Imagine how much confrontation we can avoid in the city over a cup of tea. The airport recently asked, why are local residents so angry? The simple answer is, you have not accepted repeated requests to join the community for a conversation. You've been asked by local councillors. You've been asked by the local member of parliament. You've been asked by a city council motion the last term of council. We've asked, share your strategic vision, share your short, medium, long-term plans. Let's have a professional conversation about the airport and local issues. Every other group honors these types of requests. Why is the airport so silent? Imagine how we can actually work together if we only had a cup of tea together. I acknowledge the airport's authority to remove the trees. However, this property was a cherished area for many, a place for both physical and mental solace. And with the city's focus on the tree canopy, tree protection bylaw, and focus on tree retention and replacement when trees are removed, when under the authority of the city, it seems very reasonable that after this journey, we would make a simple request of the airport to, at their discretion, working with the city or other partners, to replant trees that have recently been taken. And that's why, Mayor, this motion on behalf of the community, 22,000 people who have signed petition regarding this parcel of land is put before council today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say thank you to Councillor Brockington. Up until the last election, the Hunt Club Forest was entirely in River Ward, but it is now in Gloucester Southgate Ward. So I appreciate all the work that he's done to date to try and save the forest. Ultimately, it was clear cut in December, and that was devastating for the community. The motion, again, as Councillor Brockington highlighted, it's a very simple request. You've taken down the trees. Please replace them somewhere else at your discretion. We have an urban tree canopy target as a city under our new official plan of 40%. That's what we say is needed to combat the impacts of climate change. And so since we've taken out over 10,000 trees, the very least they can do is plant them. But it does not condone the clear cutting. And I hope that the airport would consider developing this land as a public park in the future, but that's a different discussion. This is simply saying you've taken down 10,000 mature trees. At the very least, could you plant 10,000 more trees somewhere else so that we can help to achieve our 40% target of an urban tree canopy as part of the official plan that we approved. So I hope that this is just an easy support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Councillor Desroches.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm going to support the motion in principle, and I do represent a constituency that is the neighbor of the airport, so I'm sensitive to their development and their decisions, which in some cases don't benefit the local community. And so I'm going to support this in principle. But over T, it is an airport. They do have sensitivities around airport operations, in particular birds and what have you. So just communication with the public. I think if they are going to do this, that there may be situations where safety has to be paramount. And I think we have to accept that they do have vacant lands, but there will potentially be areas where we have to be sensitive to the airport operations. So again, I'm going to support it in principle, but there may be some limitations in terms of what we can do, but let's hear from them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is the motion carried?
Sorry, dissent, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Couple of dissents. Okay, thank you. Sorry, let's go back to item 17, motion to adopt reports. Councillor Brockington, if you wouldn't mind introducing that, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. That the Built Heritage Report 10, Planning and Housing Committee Reports 18A and 20, and the report from the City Clerk entitled Summary of Oral and Written Public Submissions for Items Subject to the Planning Act Explanation Requirements at the City Council meeting of December 6, 2023 be received and adopted as amended.
Is that carried? Okay, motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure. There is a motion regarding waiver of demolition control, which I believe is of a time-sensitive nature. Conseillère Plante. So on suspension of the rules, is that carried? Conseillère Plante.
Whereas the building on the parcel of land known as 140 St. Paul Street is owned by 13739 Canada Inc. And whereas the building is currently vacant following a fire on January 31st, 2014. And whereas 2 additional fires happened in 2023. And whereas a qualified engineer with Ainley Group performed a close-up inspection of 140 St. Paul and submitted a report to the City of Ottawa, which identified the building as uninhabitable, a risk to adjacent structures and the public, whereas the report was recommended immediate demolition, and whereas the residential use building is subject to demo control, which is an application process that can take up to 98 days for a decision plus post-approval requirements, and whereas given the unique circumstances, waiving demolition control will permit the site to be made safe for the public, and whereas by waiving demolition control, the city will not receive $5,339.42, which is also the fee associated with demolition control application. Therefore, be it resolved that Council waive demolition control approval and allow the owners to proceed directly to seek demolition permit for the safe removal of the building at 140 St. Paul. Merci.
Merci, Conseillère Plante. Is the motion carried?
Carried.
Okay, thank you.
Bad.
All right, Councillor Gower has a motion regarding the Brownfield Redevelopment Community Improvement Plan, which is, Councillor Plante, your mic is still on? Your mic is still on. There we go. So in order to provide clarity on the path forward for the Brownfield CIP, including existing applications, and to give staff sufficient time to prepare the necessary reports on suspension of the rules, is that carried? Councillor Gower?
Okay, thank you. Where it is anticipated that staff will bring forward reports to the Finance and Corporate Services Committee and Council in April 2024 to implement the Affordable Housing CIP and the other changes to the city's community improvement plans approved by Council on November 22nd, 2023, through the City of Ottawa Community Improvement Plan Program Review Report. And whereas it would be appropriate for clarification on the Brownfield CIP program to be provided at the same time as the Affordable Housing CIP to help ensure alignment of reporting and implementation. Therefore, be it resolved that the following motion be tabled and referred to Finance and Corporate Services Committee for consideration at its meeting of April 2nd, 2023. Whereas Council paused the Brownfield CIP program on December 14, 2022, until such time as a review was undertaken to be considered by Council, and whereas Council considered proposed changes to the Brownfields and other CIP programs on November 22nd, 2023, and whereas during deliberations, Recommendation 7, which would have made changes to the Brownfield CIP as outlined in the staff report, was not approved by Council, and whereas the approval of Recommendation 3 and non-approval of Recommendation 7 also results in a $5 million cap where there is a stacking of applications under 2 or more community improvement plans, including Brownfield's community improvement plans, but no cap where the application is only under the Brownfield's community improvement plan. And whereas Recommendation 8, as amended, directed staff to bring forward the 7 complete applications that were received prior to the pause under the program as it was in place when they applied, was ultimately not approved by Council. And whereas Recommendation 9, which directed staff to amend the Brownfield's repayment provisions as detailed in the staff report, was approved by Council. And whereas this split approval has introduced some operational complexity and there is a need for clarity to be provided, therefore be it resolved that the 2015 Brownfields Redevelopment Community Improvement Plan program be amended to include the following changes. The repayment be based on 75% of property tax uplift for applications that qualify under the Affordable Housing CIP, or up to 100% of both affordable and in a PMTSA to encourage faster development near transit. The repayment be based on 50% of property tax uplift for applications that include housing but do not qualify under the Affordable Housing CIP. Projects without a housing component are not eligible. The maximum eligible grant for a standalone Brownfield Redevelopment CIP application be capped at $3 million. The maximum eligible grant for a Brownfield Redevelopment CIP application stacked with any other CIP program, with the exception of the Affordable Housing CIP, be capped at $5 million. Eliminate repayment of non-remediation related costs, including building demolition, feasibility studies, upgrades to on-site infrastructure as detailed in the report. Eliminate the Municipal Leadership Strategy Program.
a 20-year limit on the repayment of eligible costs. Any funding approval will become null and void if a building permit is not issued within 18 months post-council approval of the brownfields application. Be it further resolved that the 7 deemed complete applications as described in the City of Ottawa CIP program report be considered by Finance and Corporate Services Committee and Council under the rules and criteria prior to the program pause in December 2022. And be it further resolved that staff be directed to bring forward the 7 deemed complete applications for committee and council consideration at the same Finance and Corporate Services Committee meeting. Thank you. So quickly, I thank you to the mayor and his team for collaborating on this and for city staff who obviously assisted greatly with the wording. This is a follow-up to the memo that the mayor sent, I believe, just before the holiday break, and committing to come back as early as possible to council with the path forward on the brownfield CIP. It needs to be considered as part of a public meeting, and it does make sense to link that to the affordable housing CIP, which will be in front of us in April. So this is intended to give some broad strokes direction as to what that may look like, and give ample time to all stakeholders and councillors to give this consideration before we come back to debate this at committee in April. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gowan. Thank you for your help and cooperation on this. And just to be clear, we are we would be approving that this motion that you read out within the motion would be tabled and referred to Finance Corporate Services, just to be clear. Councillor Luloff.
So would it be inappropriate to ask questions about the content of that motion that would be moving forward at this time? Should we wait until a later date?
I think it would be better to have that discussion at the Finance Corporate, as long as you're okay with it going to the Finance and Corporate. The thing we're discussing today is simply whether it's going to the Finance and Corporate Services.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hill.
I think this is a similar question, but I just want to make sure the content that we are going to approve today is not new or changed content. This is simply procedural, because my concern being that we could have done a notice of motion today and then had 2 weeks to talk about this and think about it and then talk about it on the 7th. But the rationale behind doing this today is, if you could just confirm that for me, because I just want to make sure I'm not rushed. I feel rushed.
Sure.
Essentially, this is giving us 10 weeks notice of motion before it comes to committee. And the intention was to follow up on the mayor's memo that at the first opportunity at council, we would be providing some kind of an update or information about the path forward on CIP.
Okay, is that clear? Okay, thank you. Thanks for those clarifying questions, though. Appreciated. Is that carried? Okay, thank you. Notices of motion for consideration at a subsequent meeting. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move with Councillor Johnson seconding regarding the social and economic prosperity review. Whereas nearly a third of municipal spending in Ontario is for services in areas of provincial responsibility, and expenditures are outpacing provincial contributions by nearly $4 billion per year. Whereas municipal revenues such as property taxes do not grow with the economy or inflation. Whereas unprecedented population and housing growth will require significant investments in municipal infrastructure. Whereas municipalities are being asked to take on complex health and social challenges like homelessness, supporting asylum seekers, and addressing the mental health and addictions crises. And whereas inflation, rising interest rates, and provincial policy decisions are sharply constraining municipal fiscal capacity. Whereas property taxpayers, including people on fixed incomes and small businesses, cannot afford to subsidize income redistribution programs for those most in need. Whereas the province of Ontario can and should invest more in the prosperity of communities, and whereas municipalities and the provincial government have a strong history of collaboration. Therefore, be it resolved that the mayor, on behalf of City Council, be directed to write to the Provincial Minister of Finance to encourage the province, in collaboration with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, to undertake a comprehensive social and economic prosperity review to promote the stability and sustainability of municipal finances across Ontario. And happy to debate this at our next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whereas the Ottawa Police Services Board, the board is comprised of the mayor, 2 members of council, 3 provincially appointed members, and a council-appointed public member in accordance with the Police Services Act. Whereas on December 7th, 2022, council approved motion 2203-21 to provide an increase in the honorarium for a public member of the Ottawa Police Services Board who is elected as chair to $54,000 to be funded from the existing honorarium and the council administration budget credit that would otherwise go to the constituency services budget of a member of council who was elected as chair of the board. And whereas the council appointed public member who served as chair of the board unexpectedly resigned in December 2023, and a recruitment process is now underway to fill the vacant council appointed public member position. And whereas the board is required to elect a chair and vice chair at its first meeting of each calendar year in accordance with the Police Services Act, as well as the board's procedure bylaw. And whereas at its January 22nd, 2024 meeting, the Ottawa Police Services Board elected one of the provincially appointed members, Salim Fakarani, as chair. And whereas motion 2022-03-21 approved in December 2022 applies only to a council-appointed public member elected as chair. And whereas the position of chair of the Police Services Board is one of significant responsibility requiring a substantial personal commitment of time and resources, therefore be it resolved that eligibility for the enhanced honorarium provided to a council-appointed public member serving as chair of the Ottawa Police Services Board be extended to the provincially appointed members, effective upon that member's appointment as chair of the board.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. And I'll just I'll point out, I think there's a typo in the name of the chair who was pointed out. We'll fix that for next time. I'm not aware of any other notices of motion. So motion to introduce bylaws. Councillor Brockington.
Mayor, that the bylaws listed on the agenda under motion to introduce bylaws, 3 readings, be read and passed.
Is that carried? Confirmation bylaw. Councillor Brockington.
Mayor, that the following bylaw be read and passed to confirm the proceedings of the council meeting of January 24th, 2024.
Is that carried? I believe there is an inquiry from Councillor Hubley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is, well, I'll read it out and then I'll explain it. The mayor recently created the Emergency Shelter Crisis Task Force, headed up by Councillor Dudas, to address the current housing shortage in Ottawa, and we are doing what we can with current resources. However, in the news recently, Toronto is reporting as asking the federal government for $250 million to cover the shortfall needed to help with housing refugees and asylum seekers, otherwise known as the federal levy. Can staff please tell us how much federal funding is needed to cover the cost for Ottawa, or that Ottawa will be incurring to house refugees and asylum seekers for 2024 and 2025 if projected costs are available, so that council will be able to consider this as not part of our next budget discussion, but also in case we have to do something in the interim.
Okay, thank you. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Mayor, that the proceedings of the City Council meeting of January 24th, 2024 be adjourned.
Is that carried? Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Keep that chest open, shoulders down, and of course, head back. Good. We're going to switch it around and lift those toes, toe tap. Now, can we switch it around where we do 4, 3, 2, and heels, and toes, and heel and toes.
Little sound check there, Mr. Sutcliffe.
Oui, bonjour. Ça va?
Make sure it's working. Merci.
Test, test.
Good afternoon. Bonjour à tous. My name is Kendra Titley and I will be your moderator. Je m'appelle Kendra Titley et je serai l'animatrice de ce point de presse. I will now invite each agency in alphabetical order to ask their questions. You may ask one question with a follow-up. Par ordre alphabétique, j'invite maintenant chaque organisme à
In
procéder.
alphabetical order, I would invite all agencies to ask one question and a follow-up.
Identify who your question is directed to. Lorsque vous posez vos questions, veuillez indiquer à qui s'adresse votre question. We'll now start with, nous allons commencer par Elise Skura at CBC Ottawa.
Hi, Lise.
Hello. Happy late New Year. I guess I'm going to get in trouble for that. Yeah, my first question is for the mayor and perhaps to Mr. Herwire if he's able to answer. I know there's very little information as of yet on the announcement through the Housing Accelerator Fund, but we did get the application that was public. We know that the city had been hoping for $150 million, and there were seven, I suppose, arms to this. And I'm just wondering if there are any substantial changes, or if not, if we could refresh people's memory on what this would do.
First of all, we're delighted that we've been able to sign an agreement, and we're looking forward to the public announcement about it, at which we'll be able to reveal all the details, including the amount of money that Ottawa will be receiving. So I expect that there will be an announcement in the coming days. But I wanted to share with council and with the public that an agreement has been signed and that we're very excited about that. Obviously, this money is going to be extremely helpful to the city of Ottawa to build more homes, to streamline our processes, to build more affordable housing, and to do many things. So it's vitally important funds. And I want to thank the team at the city of Ottawa for their hard work in securing this funding and working with the federal government. These applications are very complicated and they are a long process. So we were thrilled to reach the finish line of this process. And I want to thank the federal government for their collaboration and cooperation on this as well.
Is there anything that staff could say just to kind of remind people the kinds of initiatives that might be through this program?
Yes, certainly consistent with our report back in, I think it was July, the memo. It's all about housing, affordable housing, and speeding up the delivery of housing and meeting our targets on those. So as the mayor indicated, once the announcement has been made, we will be reporting back to council forthwith in terms of the next steps and those details.
All right, thanks very much. My second question is about the debate that was quite heated today regarding the memorandum of understanding for the voluntary contribution. I know that you had mentioned in your opening address how well the city was responding to the kind of atmosphere around the table, but it got a little bit heated today. I wondered if you had any comments on the kinds of what one councillor called accusations that were leveled.
I think the debate today reflected that there are a lot of strong feelings about this issue, and there's been a lot of feedback in the community, and that's why we need a policy going forward that will provide clarity so that councillors know what is allowed and what's not allowed and what's acceptable and what isn't. I think in the absence of a policy, it can lead to false impressions, and it can lead to people casting aspersions on an agreement or a process. It can lead to discomfort, and it can lead to the wrong perceptions about what's happening. So I think what you saw today reflects that there are a lot of strong feelings about this issue and concerns about it. That played itself out in the discussion that happened today, and now we move forward, and we'll develop a clear policy that will allow us to move forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll go to Blair Crawford at the Ottawa Citizen.
Yes, this is for the mayor as well. Yesterday was the federal court decision on the Emergency Act, and I was just wondering if you had a reaction to that decision and what Ottawa might do in the future, given that the federal government might be more reluctant to act.
My focus is on the future and protecting the residents of Ottawa and making sure that they're safe and they're able to move about the city. I think that our police service has done a lot of work, as have city staff, on making sure that what happened 2 years ago never happens again in our city, and that measures are in place to handle those kinds of threats more effectively in the future. I think the plans are in place to do that, and I think we've seen evidence of that already. That there have been other planned events that have been attempted in the city, and that have been, they have not turned into the kind of event we saw in February 2022. So my focus is on not on past decisions or court rulings, but on making sure that going forward we have the right plans in place to protect the people of Ottawa.
Do you think you could have, or the convoy occupation could have been ended without those powers back in 2022?
I don't know. I'm not an expert on these things. I think going forward, we have the plans in place, and having gone through that experience and having read the inquiry and having adopted many of the recommendations in the inquiry, I think the city is much more prepared for these kinds of events in the future.
Second question then is, I've talked to a resident who's had significant delays with their application to the building department for severance. We've heard of complaints about delays in processing some of the claims. I know this accelerator fund, some of that money will be used to streamline that process, but doesn't do much help for people who have been waiting now. So I'm wondering if you can comment on that.
I think we've acknowledged those delays in the past, and there are a number of measures that the city is taking to address the backlog. I don't know all the specifics, but I know we're trying to give people options in terms of how they can advance their applications, and we're trying to add more staff in the legal department to address this, as we are in the planning department. I mean, city staff might have more to say about this specifically, but I know we've acknowledged the backlog, and we're working very hard to accelerate things. I don't know if you wanted to add something, Wendy or Don.
Yes, thank you. I think the mayor summed it up well. We are staffing up both at the planning level. I don't know the specifics of the example you've cited, but if it's related to legal agreements associated with severances, our legal partners have added additional staff to help with that volume. And we've also resourced outside legal to help us get through that backlog.
Yeah, that particular complaint is someone who does seem to be following the official plan, the increasing the density of a lot and so on, but just seems to be caught up in backlog right now. But thanks.
Thank you. Nous allons maintenant à Frédéric Papin à Radio-Canada.
Frédéric Papin, Radio-Canada. Mr. Mayor, hello. Could you please talk to us about how the federal money will help? How will it help you reach your objectives? There are some great goals in the city, so how will it help the city achieve them? Firstly, we are very pleased to have signed this commitment with the federal government. I am very grateful to the staff of the City of Ottawa for their hard work on this file. And I'm thankful to the federal government and all MPs, Minister Fraser and the Premier. This money will help us improve and build more housing units, more affordable housing units, and it'll enable us to improve the system. We will now be able to move forward with our plans at a more rapid rate. This plan is to build more and to build quicker.
Can you, I don't know if you can tell us, but I know we had to reach certain standards to get access to this funding. Do we add to change? Do we add to do changes, or are there changes that you can share with us that the city of Ottawa has had to make to have access to this funding? We've been talking a lot about more densifications, fourplexes, and stuff like that. So, any kind of clarity that you can give me on what people should expect to see, if there's anything different that is going to be coming with this funding out, on the field.
So we'll be reporting back once the announcement is released on those details. I don't think there'll be any major surprises, but I can't really say anything more at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Merci.
Merci, thank you. This concludes today's media availability. Ceci conclut le point de presse d'aujourd'hui. Merci.
Merci, Jean. Je vais chercher ton